Hi folks, I just wanted to make this video just to go over the current state of PvP in Throne of Liberty, touching on survivability, on how healing feels, CC stacking, and all that stuff that's more top of mind to folks at the moment. The second time recording this video, the first time there were audio issues, so I'm hoping this one is better this time around. So I apologize for that, but I hope this video is of interest to folks or useful in any sort of way. Thank you. So to start, let's talk about the current issue when it comes to, the debuff stacking that's going on in the game, and how that's impacting stats. This video or this clip is from a player named Scythology, who used to be a guildie of mine back in early TLKR days, and he's in the guild Pirates. And, in this clip, you can see how the debuffs are overstacking to an extreme amount on a tank that's leading to the tank's quick demise a lot sooner than it normally would before this patch. A lot of people are raising the question, why is this happening? And it can be for several reasons. Myself, one thing that to mention that is, very important is that, before the patch, the Disorder Sanctuary buff, which is the shield on Lombo, used to proc almost always upon receiving a weaken from any ability, and that was resulting in Lombo players being extremely difficult to kill. Now that the patch has changed the way the shield works, and it no longer procs on weaken, it just procs when you drop below 30% health, or when you hit 30% health. A lot of players, including dagger players, greatsword players, or anyone who ran weakened spamming weapons, put those weakened specializations back on or using those weakened skills. And so you're seeing a lot more players, using abilities or specializations that apply endurance debuffs, or defense debuffs, or healing debuffs, that they weren't using before. There's also a definite bug where, if you die, if you look at your stat sheet, sometimes the healing debuffs or the endurance debuffs or the evasion debuffs continue to persist. I've experienced that myself, where the healing debuffs, continue to persist after I die, and you have to relog or go to character select to actually get rid of the debuff. So that is a definite bug that exists at the moment. But there are some, additional issues that players are, bringing up based on their own tests, like Scythe has tested as well, that the debuffs are stacking in a way that are inconsistent. They're not stacking in how, they're not applying the true value of the debuff than it should be, and it's applying more. And you can easily test that with 4 dagger players and spamming your, endurance debuff on an endurance tank, and you can see that the value of the endurance debuff is a lot greater than what the daggers can actually apply. So that is an issue that players are bringing up, like Scythe. So there are likely clear issues that need to be investigated by AGS, and players like Scythe have already brought that up. But I wanted to also go over what are these abilities, that are applying these debuffs, so players are more informed, if you're not already, on what to look out for, or just to understand which weapons pose a greater threat to you based on the type of debuff that they can spam or apply. So here's a list of those debuffs that I mentioned that you should be aware of, right? So let's start with healing debuffs. Healing debuffs, there is Guillotine from the Greatsword, there's Focus Fireball from Staff, there is also Meteor from Staff, there's Mortal Mark from Crossbow, and then there's Knife Throwing from Daggers. So all these debuffs applies a significant amount of healing reduction. On most of them, it's 60%. On some of them, it's 80%. For the defense debuffs, you have the Destructive Fang passive, as well as Willbreaker. And I think I might be missing one more, but these are pretty much majority of the defense debuffs that exist in the game. And one is from Daggers, while the other is from Great. By the way, I'm going left to right for all these abilities that I'm mentioning. So again, for Endurance debuff, left to right, you have Provoking Roar, you have Cleaving Moonlight, you have Lightning Throw, you have Shadow Strike, you have Lightning Infusion, and finally you have Frenzied Sword Dance. Provoking Roar, the first one, comes from SNS, and the remainder all come from Daggers. Something important to mention here, the Endurance debuff from Daggers don't stack multiple instances of that Endurance debuff. Majority, or all the debuffs are what you call Weakened Thunderclouds, which is a weakened debuff, and that's what's actually applying the Endurance debuff, which stacks up to 20. For Evasion debuff, you have Icy Mire, which comes from Icebound Tome. Keep in mind, this is an AoE It's an AoE that's easy to pull off, especially if there are really good chokes in in the map that you're PvPing in. That could be in Siege, that could be in Wars with tight choke spaces. And that's going to be a like negative 415 evasion debuff that's applied to everyone that is hit. For shield block chance, left to right, you have the specialization for Judgment Lightning on staff, as well as the precision dash specialization on Greatsword. Now, just keep in mind that majority of these debuffs aren't on the base skill. You have to add a specialization to provide or add the debuff to the skill. But for the most part, these specializations are taken for obvious reasons. It's to apply these debuffs, it's to stack these debuffs, and that is what is, providing, additional issues or new issues for a lot of players in PvP when it comes to survivability and their, own tankiness. Now, what do you do? This is what some people might be wondering. There's not too much you can do, unfortunately. Something to keep in mind is that, as you saw, a lot of those debuffs do come from daggers, and they do come from, crossbows, for example. So I think tanks don't really have to worry too much about being impacted by those endurance debuffs in large-scale combat, because you will likely not have a dagger crossbow user going into the front line just to spin on you, because they'll probably instant die like they always like they should be, especially if if your team is playing correctly. Small scale is probably where you would counter the issues the most with debuff stacking. Besides, staff players, if you're running an evasion build on SNS, which, not many people do, but if you do, you'll be impacted by Icy Mire, possibly, or will be getting stacked on you, as well as the healing reduction debuffs, which is most likely what all tanks, people in the front line, or just anyone in PvP in general will find the most issue with, because this prevents your healer from healing you effectively, especially if it's stacked a lot and it's just, persistently, stacked on you, even if your healer cleanses it the first time. Yes, evasion builds are helpful to just completely avoid the debuff and the damage accompanied by it, or by a lot of these skills that apply to debuff, but not everyone obviously wants to swap builds to an evasion build, and that makes complete sense, especially if they already completely kitted out their, endurance builds. And some people just don't like playing evasion, and I totally get that as well. People shouldn't be forced just to play a certain stat just because, it might be stronger in certain instances. I think for a lot of players, we are just left to wait for AGS and NCSoft to come up with a solution together, and hopefully the next week's patch provides that solution with the changes they're making to the CC gauge, as well to the purification stone. Possibly it might improve things. That might be copium, but we'll see. Or you can make an evasion build if that's something you're able to do. But it's completely up to you, and you shouldn't be expected to just swap your builds to adjust to something that is ultimately poor game design. And one more thing on this, yes, longbow healers can cleanse this ability using Purifying Touch or, Clay Salvation Cleanse or Nature's Blessing Cleanse, but, realistically it's not reliable because these debuffs can be stacked multiple times. There's no cooldown between applying a debuff and then waiting, there's no cooldown that prevents you from applying the debuff again. You can just restack a debuff, you can just reapply debuff even though it's cleansed, or if it's already on you. So that's something that is related to the game design, and hopefully they change that with next week's patch or soon. Yeah, unfortunately cleanses aren't that reliable to help out with this debuff stacking issue that's going on right now. So that's it for me on this topic. I appreciate folks who watched the video. My next video will be going over my updated builds and my skill builds and just talking them through, providing rationales for them, so they're just much more clear on why things are taken and why I took a certain approach to gearing. And yeah, that's it. So thanks folks, and I'll see you in the next one.